Information about the world of running, inspiration to fuel passion and excellence, and ideas for making connections and finding community. You're listening to AtoZrunning.
Welcome back to our show. I'm Zach.
And I'm Andy.
And we're going to talk about running.
Yeah, and this week you might be very interested in what we have to talk about because who doesn't want to run faster without trying harder?
Yeah, so you noticed the title of the episode because that's the only reason you clicked on it, right? You saw the title and you said, that's an amazing title. I'm going to listen to that episode.
Well, we didn't come up with it.
We didn't. It's a direct quote from the interview with the guest, Dave Hodgkinson.
So I feel really, really grateful for his influence in my running and his mentorship throughout my high school career.
Yeah, but we'll talk more about that in just a minute. Before we do, let's get into a little bit of the world of running.
Let's get started with the world of running. Something that just happened this past weekend, USATF Club Cross Country Championships, which we've been part of before. And I have to say, as much as I love being part of a team, it was not very appealing to be running it this year because it rained all day the day before.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. It's always unappealing to run cross country in early December. Unless they were to run it in like Arizona, which they never do.
I have never run super well in cross country. So, but yeah, it was like super muddy. Like you should see some pictures of these girls. Check out Gazelle Elite. They have a picture of the girls with the mud all over them. It's pretty crazy. You can see how tough those ladies are. So first of all, congratulations to all of you who competed in this event. But I do want to make a comment because last weekend we talked about Caitlin Toohey. Last week we did, and she had won 3 straight Nike Cross Country National titles, and she was runner-up in this race. She's 17 years old. These are professional, full-grown women, and she just beat the majority of them. She's runner-up. Pretty crazy. Our very own Gazelle Elite women from Grand Rapids, Michigan placed 7th with Emily, Megan, Leah, Joanna, and Sam. Shout out to all you ladies. You are tough ladies.
So one more thing to share for the world of running is we actually mentioned in our newsletter. So if you're not signed up for the digest, get the subscribe when we post kind of thing, you definitely should because you get like premier content for no extra charge because it's free to begin with. So if you got that, we just mentioned it in passing, but Dr. Doofendock shared with us some interesting research study on marathon running. So everyone's ears perks up. Marathon running, and is it good for your knees or not? Any guesses? It might be good for your knees.
Research indicates that it's possibly good for your knees.
So they were specifically looking at like a degeneration kind of thing that might happen from that, the repetitive pounding in the marathon. And in the test subjects as they were doing the study, it was basically the ones who did the marathon training. So we're talking about like the actual training, not just one single race, but over time running and training for a marathon. The ones who did the training saw less degeneration, if you will, than the ones who didn't. So we're going to put a link to this study.
Research.
I do too, because I've been running a lot, and I keep wondering if I haven't just completely ruined my chances of walking after I'm 50 years old.
Come on.
According to this research, I have not.
Yeah.
So you want to read the study, especially if you want to see the details of that. We're going to link it in the post, so be sure you hit AtoZrunning.com/episode 11 for that. So before we get to the interview with Hodge, Andy, I wanted you to share a little bit because you're really the reason why we know Hodge and why we know so much about his work.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to run as an athlete for Hodge. She was my coach, and I attribute so much of my longevity in the sport as well as some of my performances to what he's taught me. So yeah, I guess I just feel really fortunate to have this connection.
Yeah, and folks, let me tell you, the number of times that Andy has mentioned something that Hodge taught her or told her at some point, and what's most profound about it is how little amount of time he actually coached you, and you gained so much from such a small amount of exposure.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the things that he's taught me, he's going to share some of it coming up here. But we also have written about some of these things on our blog too, because it was very influential to me and it continues to be. I hear Hodge's voice in my head giving me some coaching during my runs to this day.
Voices in your head now. So really, I mean, when we talk about what is, what has built the background of what creates our work and AtoZrunning and such, there are many different sources and influences over the years. But Hodge can be pointed to for a lot of the things, and it's not always even intentional. We don't always realize it, but we can point back to some of the things that he's taught Andy and just the work that he's done in general that's impressed upon us. So we brought him on here, and we're going to get to that interview. Just know that he's got a lot of wisdom to share, and we couldn't pack it all into 30 minutes. So we certainly encourage you to continue to follow his work, and he'll give you ways to do that at the end of the conversation.
Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining us. This is Dave Hodgkinson. Thanks for being here with us.
No problem.
So Dave, or should we call you Dave or Hodge?
Either way, whatever you want to do.
Let's go with
Mr.
Hodge.
Hodgkinson.
We know you as Hodge most historically. So we're talking about running economy today, and certainly an area that you have a vast amount of experience and expertise. If you could just give us a bit of your background and why this topic is so close to home for you.
So I was a high school athlete who ran about 17 minutes when I was a senior. So I was fairly mediocre. So after I got out of high school, I went to college, hurt myself immediately, and moved back home and decided I was going to be a coach. And somehow got interested in how do you move better. Happened mostly because of the 1984 Olympics, when I saw these steeplechasers from Kenya go 1, 2, 3 and I thought, how is that possible? How are they doing that? Watched that video maybe 50, 60 times to figure out what they were doing, and finally noticed that they're just moving their legs a little bit different when they suddenly pop off everybody else with a lap and a half to go and they just run away from everybody. So that was the initial impetus for me to start studying this. I learned from some people in Canada, all the drills and things that they do in Canada to teach people how to run well. It's mostly Canadian is a club system, so it's the Canadian clubs. And one of the clubs just south of Toronto, there was a guy who worked there who taught me some of this stuff at some clinics. And then I was at a school in Caledonia, and they sent me to Portland to learn some stuff too. And so I went out to Portland, and I was the speed and strength teacher at Caledonia, and mostly got that stuff from those two places. But this has also kind of become my hobby. So this is what I do in my spare time. I look for new ways to talk about how to move more efficiently and more effectively.
And it is telling that not only is it something that in your past, but something you just enjoy. You said as a hobby. That's profound because you feel that there's value in it, but also you pursue it passionately. So we can trust that the experiences that you have are constantly being informed by new learning, and you bring a lot to that topic.
That's the fun of it for me, is learning the new stuff and trying it with a kid or an adult and seeing them improve tremendously. That's where I kind of get my kicks from. So the topic of running economy, referring to, as you were kind of articulating, like how we move and how we do so with efficiency and those kinds of things. That's kind of that's the big umbrella. In your work, what are the most important influences on those kinds of things, on running economy and its associated facets? Our biggest problem we have when we become inefficient is that we're overstriding. So when your center of gravity is behind where your foot strike is, you're going to tend to have a stop-start motion on every step. And if we can minimize that, you're never going to get rid of it completely, because then you never load onto the legs. So we want a little bit of loading, but if we can minimize it at least, then we can become more efficient. We run faster without trying harder, which is a beautiful thing in my world.
I like that. Run faster without trying harder. So all of our listeners just perked up and said, hey, I would love to do that.
In fact, that's something that you've said to me because as I mentioned in the introduction, Hodge was my coach and he would ask me the question, do you want to feel better? And the answer is always yes, right? Have you ever had anyone say no to you?
No, but I've had people not do it because for some reason they just couldn't pull themselves into it. But they all want to feel better.
Absolutely.
So overstriding being very prominent. Anything else then?
When we overstride, that tends to cause most of the problems. And if we can fix that through various methods, most of the problems fix themselves. So the other things that we have a tendency to do wrong is we just have weaknesses, right? So if we have a weakness in our glutes and our feet turn out, then for instance, you're a little duck-footed, you tend to have some shin problems, you tend to have foot problems. So we have issues like that, but those are more personal issues that we work. The general gist of this is if we can keep the overstride down and we can keep the cadence up, you can run way more effectively and you will feel tremendously different and lighter and quicker on your feet, which is what I keep telling people. When you get to the 2 mile and a 5K, you want to feel light and quick, and things have gone really well at that point.
So what do you do to try to improve these?
So the first thing we always work on is our posture. Okay, so the very first thing we want to do is make sure that we have all of our joints in a straight line. So the top of the head, the shoulders, the hips, the knees, and the feet have to be in a straight line. When we get out of a straight line, then it encourages us to overstride because we're not standing tall and the center of gravity is dropped. So if all of those can be in a straight line and we can have some drills to make that happen, then you have much less chance of overstriding when you start to run. So first thing we do with everybody is we just have them put their hands on the top of their head, stand up tall. That's how we should feel when we run. Most of us, when we start to run, are shorter when we're running than when we're walking. Typically, we should be taller when we're running because we're propelling ourselves off the ground. Right. So we would think if we want to be effective, we want to be taller when we hit the ground, and when we stay on that ground, we propel ourselves. So if we can learn to do that, so we keep the head up tall. The next thing coming down the body is the eyes. If your eyes are looking down, your body follows your eyes. So when the eyes drop down, the hips drop back, and we're out of that straight line motion again. So those are the big things you can work on first. You get the top of the head really tall, the eyes stay up. Okay, and then as you do this, and that's a process to get your eyes up. That's not something you're going to say, hey, I'm going to keep my eyes up today, because they will immediately go down the minute you forget what you're doing. So that is a habit we have to break over time. In a race, it's beautiful. There's always somebody right there. It's the training part that's hard, right? And then in a race, we tend to get into our own heads, and as soon as you get into your own head, the eyes drop down. If you watch an elite race, you can probably see there'll be a pack of guys, pack of girls. Somebody will put their eyes down. 7 or 8 steps later, they're out the back of the pack. So their hips drop back, they overstride, they can't keep the cadence anymore, and they drop out the back of the pack.
When you're watching races, especially at like that elite or Olympic level or those kinds of things, are you looking at that stuff? Like you're watching for that kind of stuff?
Again, that's my hobby. So that's what I watch the whole time.
I love it.
So if there were like bets on races like there are on horses, you would dominate.
No, you have to bet before it starts.
Yeah, you can't bet. Yes, you can't bet with a half a lap to go.
That's true. That's true. Okay.
It's a good thing that Andy isn't into sports gambling.
Yes.
I'm not.
Unfortunately, well, there is Donovan Brazier. I can tell whether he's going to win the race when he starts the first 10 or 12 steps. He moves differently when he's dominant than he does when he's not. And obviously this last year, he was dominant all the time, right? But he's had some times in the past where he would not move well. His foot didn't come up well and back, and then he would not be able to kick at the end. And because of that, because he was inefficient, he couldn't find that second or third gear he had in the last bit of the race, which he has now every single time.
Seems like it, yeah.
Yeah.
So certainly, as you look, it's kind of like you have this top-down kind of element in that sense. When people are implementing some of those factors well, but things are still not there, where do you look next?
So I usually just work from the bottom up or the top down on individuals when I work with an individual. So if we continue the way down the body, we got the head tall, we got the eyes, then the sternum needs to stay upright. Because most of us, when we start to get tired, we'll let that come forward. And when it comes forward, when we come forward at the top, something has to compensate, and what it compensates is our hips go out the back. So when our hips go out the back, we tend to start to overstride again, the feet get a little heavy, and then we say, now I feel bad. I don't know why I feel bad. We do know why you feel bad. You feel bad because your feet are hitting in front of you. It's costing you more energy on every step to get off that foot again.
Is there risk? And so I should give context to this question, because as you're saying that, I'm just reflecting on a very recent experience where, I was feeling bad pretty consistently, and I got on a treadmill and put a camera on myself. Just put my phone somewhere nearby so I could see it, and then would run for a few minutes and go and watch it. And because I knew something was just not. And as it turns out, a lot of things were off. As I was working to correct some of them, I started to feel some back pains and some other things that just pains that weren't good and that were starting to worsen over some of that. But I was also just kind of trying to do it on my own. So all of this is coming to the question of, how do you do these kinds of changes in a way that maximizes that without risking other potential problems?
So like any change you put in your training, it's going to have to be gradual, right? We don't jack our mileage up really fast, right? We don't just decide, I'm going to sprint every day. Right? Every change has to be gradual. So what I like to do is work at the posture things first. And if we can get the postural things down, then the muscles will have time to adapt. And then you can start working on the things that will kick a little more speed into you by changing the way you're actually moving instead of just changing the way you're standing. So the postural things are what I tend to work on first. And then as I'm doing that, we will work on some strength exercises to build up some muscles that are obviously having problems with specific individuals.
I think I kind of led us to this by accident at the moment, but so there's certainly a school of thought out there, and now you know where I'm heading with this, that says we're all different, we're all unique, structurally, physiologically, biologically, and that being the case, the best thing is to let whatever is natural be, so that I feel the most natural or whatever comes naturally to me.
So I would totally agree that we're all different and we're all unique, but I would also assume that you all totally agree there are laws of physics that we cannot violate without having some effects on our body. And so while I'm looking for specific things, I'm not trying to create clones, right? So some people have longer legs. They're going to move differently than people with shorter legs. So depending on who the person is, we're just trying not to have them violate those laws of physics. And when you overstride, we have a law of momentum that when you hit in front of yourself, that law of momentum says we're slowing that momentum down if the stride is too far out in front of us. So regardless of who you are, the farther you get out front, if you hit that with force, you're going to have some problems there.
Speaking of problems, because I've had injuries, how important is running economy to staying healthy?
I think it's one of the most important things. Most typically, I can watch the way someone's running and tell you where their problem is coming from. Because, again, if you hit on, let's go back to that overstride with your foot turned out a little bit. When you do that and you roll across the arch collapses every time, which tends to mean you're going to get shin splints. So when kids start, they all tend to move like that. They get tired, the feet fly out because their glutes are weak, and they start to run, and everybody gets shin splints the first 2 weeks of middle school cross-country practice. And then what we have to realize is if we can get those glutes to work right and we can get them loose and they can be strong, that all those problems tend to go away. So I did middle school cross-country this year. Kind of fun. Interesting to start kids. Yes, and not one person on the team had shin splints this year.
That's a major accomplishment. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we should probably clap for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's so important because it seems so easy, and I'm speaking now from the coach's perspective. When I was coaching high school for the first time, it's so easy to hear the complaints and the problems and just be like, yeah, you're weak, you're undertrained, you haven't really done this before, you're new to the sport, just give it time and it'll just kind of work itself out. But without intent, you may even potentially be causing more problems, it would seem, than.
Yeah, and I think my philosophy has shifted over the years because I've dealt with middle school kids and I've dealt with elite people. So my philosophy has gone more to how can I make you better from where you're at? Which means if you're having shin splints, we got to fix those first so that you can continue to train more, right? And we can start to build those, build the mileage up, build the speed up. You can move more effectively and we can do some things. If you're hurt, none of that's going to happen. So, because I think I've had the luxury of having really good athletes before, I don't feel like I have to make every one of them really good right now. And I can be patient with them. And so that's what I would encourage anyone to do if they're changing their form. It's a process you have to do. When I learned this stuff, it took me about a year to learn how to do it well. And that was without any kind of hiccups in that time. So I changed things a little bit at a time. And I went from 1708 to 1530 in that year.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think anyone would want to see that kind of improvement.
Yeah, if we put a percentage point on that, that's exceptional.
Yeah. So the research that I can find says if you can get a 1% increase in your efficiency, which sounds like nothing, but it's actually going to take you a long, long time to do, you can get up to 10% improvement in your time. I personally have never seen anyone get 10%, but I've seen people get darn close. 20-minute girls run 18:15 if they work at this stuff and move differently. There are a couple kids that I worked with over the summer who were 7th and 8th people on their team, and the next year they went in, they were the first runner. So just by fixing their form and fixing their efficiency. The nice thing is when you get more efficient, there's less pounding on your body, which means now I can do a little more. Now I can do it a little faster. And now the training effect starts to get in there too. And so you're not just learning to move differently. It also opens the doors to doing things better and doing things harder.
So a scenario, I'm curious then, because you mentioned, a full year in that one instance to really kind of get to that point. And certainly it would take time, even if it's not a full year for anyone. Let's say I've got 6 weeks before a major race. I'm running a marathon in 6 weeks. I'm going for my Boston qualifier or a PR. And I'm feeling some of those things, or I'm listening to this podcast and I'm like, I've never thought of these things before. So I got to fix it right now. Do I do that? Do I do only certain things? What would you tell me?
Tremendously bad idea to try and fix it all right now. So you should fix one thing at a time. So if you're trying to get that Boston qualifier time, and this is just going to be the thing that maybe kicks you over the edge, maybe it's just keeping your eyes up, right? Maybe it's just I'm going to find someone to stare at the back of their hat the whole stupid race, and they're going to drag me through to that time. Or you stare at the sign with the little time on it, right? Your eyes are up then, right?
If you're close enough to the sign that you can see it, right?
Yes. So you've got a bunch of things you can do there. So that I would try to do one thing at a time. When I did this, I added one thing at a time in. And when I coach athletes, I usually give them one specific thing to focus on at each point. And once they master that, then we move on to the next ones.
Is some of that the teacher in you talking to?
Absolutely. Yes.
Isn't that it though? If we want to do this right, we need to do each part of it right.
Absolutely.
I love that. So I'm curious, kind of taking this outside of the immediate context of training and just our everyday lives and all of the things, the activities we find ourselves in, or even just sitting at the dinner table and how we sleep, and all of these kinds of factors can influence this kind of stuff. What are the things that we should be more aware of and trying to avoid so that we're not counterproductive to the good work we're doing in training?
Yeah, I think one of the things we can do, we all tend to live our lives in our own heads, which means most of the time your eyes are down. And it's very interesting to put your eyes up. I learned this personally. We were hiking in Colorado through the snow, and we had a young man in the back who could not keep up no matter what. We were constantly trying to get him to keep up, and he's always looking at the trail, trudging along. So the guide, who now I consider to be my personal teacher, says, "Get up here in the front. Show us where we're going." the kid looks up, he's got to follow the trail, and now he's charging all the time. We can't keep up with him. So a lot of that taught me a ton about just how we live. And a lot of times when we live all focused down and in, we tend to, that personality trait or that physical turns into a physical manifestation, right? So if we can just think out, out and out, think about what's going on instead of thinking about just what's that voice in my head that's constantly spinning. That would be one big thing. And we do that all the time, right? When we sit in the car, we have a tendency to just focus right here instead of sitting up tall and focusing out, right? So all those little things you can do will build the strength that it takes to do, to make you a better runner while you're out there on the road.
I really needed to hear you say that about keeping your eyes up in daily life, because I'm someone who's sitting on my phone looking down, and even just being hunched down in my social media. I think a lot of people, I don't think I'm the only one who struggles with that, but I totally get what you're saying, because my attitude even is not as good as if I'm active during the day, like doing cleaning or keeping my eyes up, going outside. So I can really take that with me, and that will be really great just in my daily life.
We work in the summer, I work at a camp, and one of the things we do there is we take the kids' phones away.
Yes.
Awesome.
So they don't have a phone for 7 straight days. And the difference in those kids from the time they get there to the time they leave is incredible. And a lot of that, I believe, has to do with the fact that they are not staring at their phone constantly. So they are engaged, they are paying attention, they are moving better, they are having more fun, interacting with other people. It's amazing what happens when we take that little crutch away from them.
Hodge, you're hurting me a little bit here, because I am a willful and joyful introvert and very much appreciate the world inside my head and often don't appreciate the world outside my head. This is an extreme example, obviously, but that's just it. It might feel uncomfortable and awkward. I'm just thinking about this. It might feel uncomfortable and awkward, but there's more than just training value to this too. Like, to be aware of the world around me, and especially the people around me. Then, as a consequence, that's good advice.
Well, and the interesting thing about this is we all know what a depressed person looks like. Right? You see someone, you can pick them out. If I asked you to stand like a depressed person, you would hunch your shoulders over, you would put your head down, right? You'd roll your shoulders in, right? The exact opposite of what we were just talking about. So it's a feedback loop, right? So when you stand like that because you feel bad, it makes you feel worse. And it's just a feedback loop. There's an opposite feedback loop too. Right? So if we can get tall, we can stand up, we can keep our eyes up and get into that good posture in a nice straight line. Then all of a sudden, the upward feedback loop comes. I feel better all the time. What we tend to do in a race, though, the minute something goes wrong is, oh no, and we collapse. Right? And so if we can learn not to do that by focusing out, and I agree with your introvert, which some people would be surprised. I'm extroverted when I need to be. So, yes. But that feedback loop going the other way is the key to being successful, because you're not going to have a race or a run where everything goes right the whole time. And it's the overcoming that and sticking with what we need to do, which will continue to lead us into feeling better and running faster.
I definitely appreciate that. And there's a clear connection to the conversation so many of us have just about like goals and expectations, especially in performance. And that if you have only one goal, and especially if that's a challenging goal, and you're not reaching it or you're not on pace to reach it in a performance, that's immediately disheartening, discouraging, right? And so then we see that pattern of, the physical ramification of that discouragement as well. But even just then, the idea of, if you can have a kind of a tier of goals, and especially if you can salvage a performance, how much more effectively can you do that when you're mindful of those kinds of things, so the physical part doesn't start to collapse just as severely as that emotional part would?
Andy and I have probably talked hundreds of times about this exact thing. I believe in process goals. Outcome goals are awesome. But outcome goals aren't where we get our kicks. Our kicks should come from that process goals. And that process goal, when I talk with kids, I have these like Jenga blocks that I stack up, and we try to knock them over but you just build the process goals down, and you can take one little block and you can blow on it. And if that block, as I tell students most of the time, that block is, how can I get better right now? Regardless of what's going on, regardless of how I feel, or if it's awesome or horrible, what am I doing to get better right now? You can just blow on that block and all the big ones start to fall. And so that's what I try to do with the form stuff, right? So I can specifically remember at Carson City where Andy was in the middle of the race, in the 30s maybe, in the race, and I said, Andy, just get your feet out of the grass, and boom, she did it. Goes from 30 to 4th at the end of the race. Had an incredible second half of the race and got done and went, the second half felt so much better than the first half.
And you're like, of course.
Yeah.
Right?
You know, one of the things that just makes me think about is how often we hear coaches, and I love this. I love being at races, just listening to the coaches. What are they yelling at the athletes, and what are they saying before or after, but especially during? And, you know, we know that it's not a new thing to try to be aware of these kinds of factors. I think there's a lot of ideas out there and not a lot of like clear plans. And so it's really helpful as you're articulating that, Hodge, to really see kind of a clear plan of intent to make the best possible changes. But I'm just reflecting a moment on, sometimes I hear coaches saying things and I don't quite understand what they're trying to accomplish by yelling that at an athlete.
Like, hustle.
Well, there's, you know, that can be positive, I guess, in some instances. But I want to give an example. And then I'm curious if you have any, Hodge, if you have any that you've heard that you're like, what on earth are you trying to say there? So here's the example that we always laugh about here. We're at a track meet, and I don't remember, it was a national championship in college somewhere, you know, right? So high-level stuff. And this coach is yelling at one of the distance runners every time, every lap. He yells, forearm angles. I'm quoting directly. Forearm angles, forearm angles. First of all, I'm not sure what angles you have in your forearm. Secondly, what is he trying to accomplish with your forearm angles?
I'm guessing he's telling the athlete that his hand is too close to his shoulders and that the head had to drop. Drop your hands would probably be a little easier to say, and maybe that kid would understand it, so you didn't have to say it every time. So, but there's a little something to that, but as we were talking earlier, there are individual differences because we're all built different. So when I was running my 17 minutes, my hands were right up there on my shoulders, right? And I learned to drop them. Generally, when my center of gravity came up higher, the hands went down by themselves, right? So I think sometimes we worry about things that look bad, that don't really, they're not caused by what we think they are. Like no one's hands are on their shoulders because, oh, that's the way I like them. They're there because something else is causing them to be there, right? And mine was because my center of gravity was too low. I was overstriding, and my hands had to go somewhere, so they just came across my body. Because if I swung them straight over here, my hand would have been over my head, and I would have looked like an idiot. So nobody wants to do that. So we compensate. So we pull them across instead. So when you figure out what's actually causing the issue, it's way easier to fix rather than just insisting that the athlete puts their hands down. I'm guessing if they could, they would have done it a long time ago. One of the reasons I became a coach when I was in high school, the team that we were always trying to beat had a coach who would go off onto the back of the course, smoke a cigarette, and swear at his athletes as they went by that they weren't trying hard enough. And I thought, I can do better than that.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm going to do because I know I can do that.
Yeah, and that's, you know, and that becoming something, you know, you've impacted so many athletes and programs, you know, both the programs you've coached and just the ones you've supported instill significant impacts. And so as I'm just kind of reflecting on, you know, that process for you, that's been profound, and we can certainly appreciate, you know, Andy benefiting directly from time working with you and so many others too. So thank you for making that choice and for entering the field with such passion.
This is who I'm supposed to be, in my opinion. I feel like I've been led to certain places to deal with specific individuals, and I can point to them at every one of the places I've been. And And I think this is just who I was made to be. And so I've accepted that and don't try to be someone else. So.
Well, we appreciate who you are. And there was something that I was thinking of when we were talking about keeping eyes up. And I remember a time, well, many times that was part of the conversation that we had. And then a specific time that we were at the track and you just said, just run over there. And he's like, run like that. Run like you're going somewhere. Because, and I've actually taken that with me. I think that in my head when things are tough all the time, because I think as athletes, when we're in pain, sometimes we think like we're in this twilight zone where the moment never ends. And whenever I think, no, I'm going somewhere, and my posture is better, like I start running with better running economy. And I distinctly remember that when you had me just run across the field and you're like, yeah, run like that.
When you do that, you're running with purpose instead of just to get it done. And a lot of times we run just to get it done. When you're a little kid and you're running to get a ball, watch them. It's beautiful, right? There's no thinking. They just go, right? And when we think that way, when we're thinking, I'm just going to get to that point, right? And then you can play with speed, you can play with things, and then it becomes more of a game like the kids, and you enjoy it so much more than if you say, I'm going to march down here with my head up tall and my eyes straight up and not enjoy this. No, you got to have some fun with it. The whole purpose, in my opinion of this, the whole purpose is to test ourselves, right? We want to see what we can become and how we can get better, and that helps us in all areas of our lives, right? And B, to have a good time. I'm hoping nobody runs because it's your chore, right? Yes, so I think we all have some kind of enjoyment from this.
So that's really that's the great summarizing statement. I think we just can draw that out one more time, which is, how does it begin when you first talk to an athlete, and why should you do these things? And so, Hodge, if you could just say that for us one more time, then why do you tell athletes to do these things?
So when somebody's starting to run, my big thing is, how can we get better as people, right? We just want to make ourselves better. And I have my purpose statement for cross country every time I coach is, how do we get better physically? How do we get better emotionally? How do we get better spiritually? How do we get better in every single way of our life? And we include academic in that when I'm dealing with students. And so if we can improve in those areas all the time, then things turn out to be really good. And when you're improving, it's fun. Right? So if we can take care of these little tiny things, like just standing a little taller, then it makes the enjoyment better, right? You feel better while you're getting it done. You feel better when you're going faster. And so those are the things we work on.
Well, we really appreciate your time just sharing this. I mean, here, in this venue, obviously, if you're in an ideal world, if you're giving some people some advice, you want to be seeing and, talking with them directly. So really what we would encourage anyone listening to this is, if they're hearing the things you're saying and they're thinking, I don't think I can do this by myself, then they should reach out to somebody. And is there in your work, is there a way for someone to contact you and say, hey, can you give me some of your advice?
So I'm working on putting up a YouTube channel, so that will be attached to this at some point. And so you could get some stuff there. There are some people that I deal with in the summer. It's called Speed Tech. It's mostly high school and middle school kids. Gazelle is talking about doing some stuff with older people, and so we are looking at doing that too. So, but you can reach out through Facebook and look for me there, and I will be happy to give you something. I have probably 5 or 6 people I coach exclusively on the internet. So they send me a video, and I send some stuff back.
The fact that you can do that, the technology works for us in that way is wonderful too. Because then I don't have to be in West Michigan to be able to benefit from that too. So that's awesome.
Well, thank you so much for being here. It means a lot to us, not only because we have connection to you, but also because you're obviously a high expert in this area. So thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
We've linked to Hodge's new YouTube channel. It's fresh, so make sure you subscribe to that because he's going to be putting some really interesting stuff on running economy and form. You can find him at Coach Hodgkinson and on our podcast blog.
Yeah, anytime someone says, I've got a lifetime of work and knowledge and experience in this particular thing, and I'm just going to start sharing it for free, jump on that. Right? That's why we wanted to interview him and bring these ideas to you, and we hope that you gained as much as we do when we talk with Hodge about these kinds of things too. So Andy, I know that after your history with him, there's always just like the one or two things that just really stick with you, and you've mentioned some to me. So what's the thing that Hodge has left you with that sticks the most?
Well, that's a lot of pressure because there's a lot of things. But I do want to say...
Hodge is also going to grade you on your response. So respond
He wasn't my teacher. He was my coach. So eyes up. I mean, I am telling people constantly that piece of advice that he gave to me because I do think, and this is very dramatic, but I do believe that eyes are the light of the body, and keeping our eyes up feeds our eyes with good things. And we did talk about how oftentimes our posture influences our mindset, and he did
or the other way around.
Right, exactly.
And your emotional state also influences your posture. They go hand in hand.
Right. So that really stuck out to me today, and I actually had to use that on my run today because it was snowy and I was feeling a little cold and discouraged. So it was nice to have that in my brain, like keep my eyes up, keep my feet light and quick. And the body really does follow those cues. So if you do today take away anything, I think something to work on is keeping those eyes ahead.
So should we blame Hodge for that time that you slipped on the cone because your eyes were up and you didn't see the cone, the orange bright cone in front of you?
If anything, it just, meant that I wasn't supposed to be in other sports.
So one other thing we just wanted to mention, because it's key with a lot of our work ongoing, is you noticed back in our training guide when we were posting about that on the blog, we had 3 parts, and those 3 parts are going to come back to haunt you in anything that you follow from our work. And the number 2 part is titled Become a Stronger Animal, or Becoming a Stronger Animal. And that's a Hodge quote, right?
Yeah. Well, he had written on this piece of paper before one of my seasons things that I needed to work on, and one of them was becoming a stronger animal. He wrote that. So yeah, it's been a focus recently for me personally, but I think every single runner could benefit from the idea that we need to be stronger, more mechanically sound to have better running economy.
Yeah, listen, you want to be a better runner, you got to be stronger, faster, harder, better, strong. Oh wait, no, that's a song. You got to be strong. You got to be stronger, and we know that. So strength and mobility, they go hand in hand. That's exactly what Hodge was talking about, and there's no surprise there that if you read anything on what does it take to succeed in this sport, that's a key piece of the equation.
Well, thanks for joining us. As always, we welcome your ideas for podcast episodes. We'd love to hear from you. Make sure you find us at AtoZrunning on both Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.